that we might be recorded, and that you'll guide our conversation, help us to be honest and open with each other, but also to learn and to grow. In your name, amen. Okay. Yes, chapters 2 and 3. I said last time that that's what we were going to do. Chapter 2 is kind of one focus, and there's a piece. She has one here, so there's. Yeah.
Pretty fascinating.
Chapter 3 is maybe a section that we'll spend a little more time with, and maybe has drawn some memories in your life. I don't know. We'll see where we go with chapter 3. Chapter 2. Any comments about it? Just is there anything that stood out to you in that first chapter 2 here? Just offhand, anything that stood out to you at all? Or that you remember?
Well, it did stand out to me, the discussion about the millennials being especially crushed by economic conditions.
Uh-huh. And
That's a group that I don't really relate to
Mhm.
very much,
Mhm.
but I can see the chaos that comes with economic pressures, ability to go to school, to get a job, to buy a house, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm. Okay. Anyone else have that stand out or become more aware of? Okay. Anything else?
I'd like to comment, there is a point where self-reliance becomes isolation.
Ah, self-reliance. So one of the issues, yeah, one of the questions here, kind of jumping down for a moment, author spoke of deaths of despair. How do you understand such deaths? What are deaths? Come on in. So, yeah, here's some. Oh, comfortable chairs there. There you go.
I underlined a lot in this chapter.
You underlined a lot?
A lot of it.
Okay.
There was that.
See, my problem is on Kindle, so I don't have the page. What is it?
Oh, it's on page 26.
26. How do you understand, first of all, deaths of despair? What's that? What does it mean even? Basically, deaths of despair are when people can't. I've said here, I gotta have my glasses on always. When people fail to find meaning in their life. So part of that is that isolation that happens. There's one chair over here.
I got one here.
Okay. So when people find themselves so isolated, that meaning, it's hard to be isolated, the loneliness, the sense of failure, perhaps even. What are some of the other reasons that maybe the book or you can think of that people end up feeling as if there's no meaning in life.
The part about American exceptionalism stood out for me, the expectations that are put upon, that's all of us as Americans, that people in other countries don't have.
Okay,
And yet by your bootstraps, expectation that you will succeed, and to succeed is money. basically.
mhm, mhm. And as I think I said last time, my kids, my two sons in high school were told over and over and over again that they could become anything they wanted to become. And that's garbage. I mean, it really is garbage. My son really wanted to be a meteorologist, and he was lousy at math and science. That is not something he could do.
And so along with that is, okay, so if that's the myth, and then you can't achieve it, then there's something wrong with you.
There's something wrong with me. That's
And
right.
then there's the loss of hope.
Mhm.
I was told over and over again, you want to make a decent living, all you have to do is go to college.
Ah,
That
That's-
was just the key to everything.
mhm.
That goes back to the millennials getting sucked into giant college debt and, feeling that crush.
Mhm.
I think also there is in our society just a lot of comparing ourselves with others and feeling that we fall short. It's just a mind block that people can't work through.
Mhm.
Well, he's got this, I should have that. She's got this, I should have that.
So there's a lot of issues. One of the things they talk about is aggrieved entitlement. Aggrieved entitlement. What does that mean?
What I got from the book is that it's, people have a kind of construct in their minds that life should be this way.
Mhm.
And when it doesn't turn out like that, then there's anger. That it's not happening, it's not working the way it's supposed to work.
Mhm. That somehow. And let me go with this. White males especially end up feeling that they have a right to this, that, and everything. And when people of other ethnic backgrounds perhaps begin to take over some of their positions or the things that they expect that they want, that's an aggrieved entitlement that happens.
Well, for me, there was because every time one of these, things, mass shootings happen, my brain always goes to, why aren't we talking about, like, the mentality of white men and how that is affecting us? It almost never comes up.
Mhm.
And then it did happen here, though, about that, even though they're publicized more, that white male shootings are not as prevalent as I had anticipated they were. I would have said 95% of them were by white men,
Yeah.
but based on the statistics, that's not the case based on how.
But they're still a majority.
No, for sure, but and so, I've had to remodel what I say now is, why are we not talking about that kind of male privilege piece of it, not necessarily white male privilege only,
Yeah.
but just male privilege, because
Mhm.
they're not taught to like manage emotions and keep close relationships it's just not the same as
Mhm.
how we keep young girls to interact with each other, I don't think.
Mhm.
And they're not taught how to healthfully deal with things.
And since you opened the door. I found it interesting that Latino men were disproportionately underrepresented in these mass shootings. And this morning I was thinking about that. Now, why would that be? Why would that be? And then I'm thinking, in Latin culture, romance and friendship and those things are celebrated. a lot more than in our culture. And maybe Latino men just don't have that sense of brutal machismo. Does that make any sense?
I'm not so sure about that. I spent a year and a half or so in Mexico. And had two Spanish language teachers, one of them female. She went out of her way to talk about machismoism and how violent that is.
Ah,
It's
Well-
just part of that culture.
huh,
Well, it seems like the difference is that's an accepted part of the culture, but it's not as frequently going beyond that level to the mass shooting level.
Yeah,
And so, you know, maybe it's a release valve, but I think probably more to the point is there's still cultural structure that hasn't morphed a whole lot, and that gives predictability to it. Whereas, you know, I think the problem with this expectation, if I do things right, I should be rewarded. And of course, that doesn't take into consideration globalization of economy, where the factories are now in China and the average working class man has fewer and fewer options to be successful and raise a family where the wife doesn't have to work. So the things that were quote unquote interpreted as promises when they were young aren't delivered in today's
Mhm.
circumstances.
The other thing that kind of stood out to me was the issue of healthcare. And that when a person gets laid off from a job, oftentimes their healthcare also goes defunct. They no longer have healthcare. And how that too puts such a strain on people. And partly the mass shootings that are associated with workplace are often anger over being laid off. And does that have part of even the whole healthcare systems? You know, we have a broken healthcare system today. We do. And it was highlighted today in the prayers of the church. Somebody had to wait for how long for their surgery?
It's okay.
Until January.
Yeah, till January. I mean, there's craziness about that. There's craziness. And
Two things that, like 3 times this week I've come across figures that said a high percentage of mass shooters were on antidepressants, which can cause them to suicide.
mhm.
So I don't know if there's a bearing there or not, but the writers of these studies seem to think there might be a correlation.
Are the ones that you were reading about, yeah.
And the other thing that
They
occurs
don't
to
say
me, I don't know how many of these young men are gamers, but the violence in video games that they play and be addicted to over and over. And if you already have fuzzy mental problems, how do you differentiate between what's real and what's fantasy?
Okay,
We've looked at that, again, I'm speaking as a PhD in psychology now, we've looked at gaming and violence, there's absolutely no connection between the two. Like
Yeah. it's never mentioned in the book either,
No.
that I know of.
There's an overwhelming mountain of research predicting, there was a few studies that came out of Ohio State University by one particular scientist who tried to prove the connection. All the evidence has been correlational showing a link, which you cannot prove cause and effect from correlation, but when we've actually tried to run experimental studies on it, it just washes out. So it's more likely that when you have someone who's committed a mass shooting, they already have violent tendencies, they may be attracted to violent games, but the overwhelming majority of people who play violent games are not violent people, myself included. What do you put about that?
What about, the availability of mental health care though?
That is a much,
It hasn't.
that's a messy, again, speaking as a psychologist, that is a really good point. And I wish we had significantly better mental health care funding in this country because when we're working with students who are at risk and I've had a couple who come to my classrooms who I sort of pegged as this may be a passive administration. When we intervene, what we do is we refer to counseling very often, and we're really lucky to have college. So we have resident counselors who can talk with people and give them equipment that they can use to try to manage whatever they're going through. But the overwhelming majority of young adult men have absolutely no idea how to access mental health care.
Yeah.
Do not have health insurance to cover it. And if they encounter the mental health care system, their healthcare providers are overwhelmed. So it may be very difficult to, like, if you have somebody who is showing aggressive tendencies or suicidal tendencies or signs of depression, you probably want to see them consistently a couple times a month. And very often you have to wait months at a time to get in for an appointment. So I don't think that, and again, as someone who teaches about abnormal psychology, it's not that someone with a mental illness is instantaneously dangerous or violent. That's overwhelmingly not the case. You gotta kind of think about the Venn diagram here, like the large circle is the people who have mental illnesses. There's just a very, very small circle down here that you can fit in all the folks who've had mental illnesses and committed mass shootings, if that helps.
What about health insurance generally? Does it cover mental health care?
It depends on what health insurance you have.
Yeah.
And most of it, in my experience, most of the health insurance carriers that are at least kind of will have some coverage for mental health, but then it's a question of how many visits do you get.
Yeah,
And they may give you like 6 visits, and then that is not enough to manage clinical depression, right? Like you need to be seen regularly and have the opportunity to talk with somebody about what's going on. And it's just, if insurance companies had stronger moral compasses, you would see some better allocation of visits and funding to that, but it just really depends on the kind of insurance you have.
Thank you.
Sure.
let's look at the chapter 3. I'm not sure how many looked at that chapter or read it. It deals with trauma. How do we understand trauma? What is trauma? What is it?
So it says it a little bit in the book, but also from some other trainings I've had. We all experience critical incidents. We all experience stressful events. The trauma is whatever the impact is on a person, like a child, right?
So say it again.
So we all experience critical incidents and stressful events, but trauma is what the impact is on the person.
Yes, I would define it as a combination of the severity of the stimulus or the experience that a person has, in addition to the severity of their nervous system reaction to it. So yeah, I think that was a pretty fair.
But part of it is about definitions, whether your trauma is a response to some tragedy. Tragic events, I think, was what they were saying. And my language experience doesn't say that to me trauma is already what's happening to you, rather than just how you respond to it.
Well, I mean, if you think about it as a lingering response, right? So when we're looking at, again, from being a psychologist and prefacing all everything I'm saying, you're thinking like a scientist when I look at this. When I understand the trauma, I am looking at a nervous system that had a severe enough emotional reaction that it tripped your fight or flight response. And when we're looking at post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety disorders, what's happening is the nervous system is still behaving as if it is continuing to experience that response. So your fight or flight reaction just doesn't shut down, or it keeps, the way we define it in psych is invasive symptoms. So you have invasive signs of that fight or flight response continuing to show up. in a context that has nothing to do with the trauma itself. So the person will have like heightened reaction times, overly aggressive behavior, or a really intense avoidant behavior in a context that has nothing to do with the original injury, the damage, or traumatic event itself.
It even goes beyond flashback.
Oh, yeah, no, there are 5 symptom categories for PTSD. The flashbacks are what we would consider invasive symptoms, that's just one of the categories.
As you read this chapter, did it trigger any memories for you?
So the section on the ACEs, the
Mhm.
adverse childhood experiences. And so Sherry, the school district did a training on that several years ago, and we kind of supported that and just volunteers. Even food and stuff like that, but it was interesting. The childhood experiences, you know, like physical abuse and sexual abuse, or
Mhm.
alcoholism, the things, those are things in the, like 7 of them
I
in
don't
the
know.
household, and those seem to be a real telltale, barometer of how,
Indicated, yeah.
of people who might be leaning towards this shooting thing, but it was interesting for me when we did it back then, is what happened in my house, you know,
Mhm.
and my house wasn't, you know, we had a couple of those things to deal with, you know, and so and I could see in my 4 brothers, my sister seemed to get kind of isolated, my 3 brothers, 3 brothers, eventually, but that impact it had on them, you know, in terms of, I don't know, I was like 5 years older than my next brother, so I kind of went through it a little differently, but it really showed, it caused me to think how those things happen, and I could see at least a couple of my brothers responded to that in a negative way. I mean, it really was hard on them.
Mhm.
And it still carries through, you know, in terms of how they do things. And I can't imagine having 3 or 4 of those things going on. What kind of person, how that might impact your view of the world, your view of your self-esteem, and where's my place in life, and that, and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, as I read the chapter, it brought me back to growing up. I grew up in a family where we were absolutely afraid of my father. If I was to say what was the dominant emotion in the family, it was fear. By every respect. And it wasn't because he was violent. I don't ever remember being hit by him. Maybe I blocked things out, but I don't think so. I really don't. Rather, we were so afraid of him, we didn't ever question. I mean, we just did what he told us to do.
Huh.
And as I read this, I thought, okay, where I'm at now is different than where I grew up. And why? And at the end of the chapter, it gives a whole list of positive kinds of experiences. And I went through all of those. And the numbers of things that happened positively in my life far, exceeded in some ways just the fear. So God was gracious enough to allow the positive experiences, including other people who were there to mentor me and to walk beside me. I had neighbors who were extremely good. The only birthday party I ever remember was put on by a neighbor.
Was yours a Christian home?
My mom was Christian. My mom was very, very solidly Christian. And she is the one who taught me to pray. And we prayed, but we prayed on our knees with the door shut, afraid that my father would find out, who was absolutely opposed to the church.
Huh.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting background. In a lot of ways, maybe I'd end up going a different direction, but I didn't. I think because of all the positive kinds of experiences that God allowed me to have. Now, if those were not there, what would have happened? I have a feeling I would know. I realize what might have happened. Because I grew up extremely shy. Extremely shy, and that was probably because of fear that was instilled early on.
Well, I think isolation is a real driver here.
Mhm.
If you don't have a support system, if you don't have an opportunity to get support, if it's all on you and you are isolated, you really are drowning without.
Mhm.
Oh, the pandemic.
Yeah, and the pandemic just exasperates what was taking place in lives of people.
You know, it's pretty obvious that, you know, we're obviously talking about things that lead to these mass shootings, which, you know, on a large scale and a small percentage, thankfully, but these things that are being described also lead to a whole slew of other bad outcomes in people's lives that just create unnecessary pain and disruption.
Just start with drug abuse, period.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I think the resilience of young people is an important feature, right? I don't know how to explain who fails to be resilient, but you know, a lot of people get mistreated in the same way and yet don't become mass shooters. It's an extreme. And I remember reading something about alcoholics and people's response, behavior, that sort of thing. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was comparing them to people who had gone through concentration camp experiences, that sort of thing. That you know, you get a dozen people who go through that same experience, and 11 of them come out well at the end. I mean, they're altered by it, but they still are able to cope. And one of the ones that does
Page 51 has something at the top about all that. And it says, according to the Harvard Center for the Developing Child, the single most common factor for children who are resilient in the face of trauma is a stable, committed relationship with a supportive adult. It's the single most important buffer.
Look at that last page on the sheets. Did you have at least one caregiver with whom you felt safe? Did you have at least one good friend? Did you have beliefs that gave you comfort? Did you like school? Did you have at least one teacher who cared about you? Did you have good neighbors? Was there an adult, not a parent, caregiver, or a person from the first question, who could provide you with support or advice? Did you have opportunities to have a good time? Did you like yourself or feel comfortable with yourself? Did you have a predictable home routine, such as regular meals or regular bedtime?
You know, when I look at that list, I would say the church played an awful huge role growing up in the church and providing kind of an atmosphere.
For me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me too.
You know, a lot of these positive experiences, for me at least, came through church relationships.
And I think it should, and that's what the church should be. Unfortunately, there are many also stories about people whose trauma came from the church.
Yeah,
And that,
from the church.
um,
So one of the directions that this book is going is, and one of the directions that Matt wants us to look at, I think, is what does it mean for us as a church to be in relationship with people? And people in general, but especially those who society might end up shunning in one way or another. And just brought up two contrary kinds of things. One, how the church ends up hurting so many people. And how the church has also been a healing source for many of us. Why is that? Why is there such a difference between healing and abuse, really, from the church?
I think part of what I was kind of recollecting back to is just, there are sections within the Christian faith who are more against incorporating things that science puts forward as information that we should not consider anti-faith. And mental health is part of that. Growing up and having issues with depression and going to a campus ministry when we were in college, it was kind of like, if you just pray hard enough, it'll just go away. There's something about you that's not letting God work in you because of this, how this is. And that then creating even more, like, it's just keeping more, on to that person. And then, coming, to a place where I can have a faith that also recognizes that, like, science is something we do to investigate and we learn things from it. And it doesn't mean it has to negate our faith, but we can include those pieces of information. And but it's not just the church. Like, I think as a country, we have a hard time separating a person's personality from a mental illness disorder. My dad has a head injury. You cannot tell him there's something wrong with his brain. He does not understand that his brain is an organ that can be damaged just like his heart or his lungs or his kidneys or his liver. He thinks that he just broke his leg and he can't do things because his leg is the problem, right? Because in our family, mental illness was not a thing. Like, it's just you making a conscious choice to do something in the wrong way, right? So, but there's a pervasiveness in this country when we talked about healthcare, people not treating mental health issues like it's an actual physical problem.
Sarah, I totally agree. I heard, well, you're just not praying hard enough, or you're not using the right words. So, there's nothing wrong. You just don't have any trust.
You're just a bad person.
Yeah.
Well, that's, it's with denominations. It's why we have such a spectrum in the Christian realm. Is it a smiting God or a loving God? Is it a gentle Jesus or a judging Jesus? It's part of it's the congregation, the church, the minister, the atmosphere. Really.
And yet, when somebody from the streets comes into this church, how many of us go to intentionally talk to that person? I don't think very many. So even though our theology isn't going to lean toward it's your fault, our actions don't necessarily go that way. I'm sorry.
So I'm just thinking a lot about like what Taffy does. Like, yes, people need toothpaste and a meal, but that human connection with somebody who's saying, I care, I think is so important. And there was a pastor at the Lutheran church, Charlie Mays, and he used to go down to the Hollywood Beach regularly and hang out there and feed people, like, and just be there. So I don't think a lot of people who are on the margins are going to be coming in the building here to church. Like, I just don't see that happening much.
Well, we do have once in a while.
Once in a while.
Yeah, but I understand what Vicky's saying. Real outreach is going where the troubled people are, not waiting for them to come into the door.
And that's exactly right. But they do come in our doors.
Yeah.
And when they do, what happens?
But the one I recall smelled so bad
Yeah.
that it was, that
That's
was a problem.
I think it's how you also feel. Are you comfortable talking to these people? How do you feel like, you don't know how to talk to them?
And that I understand.
Well, it's reason church is a place for chit chat. That's what we call fellowship. It's church on Sunday. I mean, it is. Nothing happens in a 5-minute conversation or so all of a sudden now you're faced with somebody who might have an issue, you know, and you're looking at your watch and you got dinner in the oven and you know, what are you gonna do? This isn't the place to do that. Now, should we engage? Yes. Should we do our best to make somebody welcome? But I think church is a lousy place to actually engage with
No,
somebody. with-
it is a lot of fun.
Especially on Sunday, because we're here to worship. That's why we come on Sunday. We're here to worship.
But
But
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
you
gonna
have
go
to
with
see,
it.
you have to see Christ in the margins. too.
Exactly.
You do. So
Yeah.
that can't be an act of worship, but I would say the venue is such that it's more of an inconvenience than it is worship.
and what is more important, worshiping or being with somebody who needs to talk?
Well, it sounds like the latter is an act of worship.
I think it is.
Mhm.
I
And
definitely
then
think
we
it is.
can just carry that on. So what if somebody walks into our church office on a Wednesday morning? What if somebody shows up at the pastor's office and the pastor isn't in? How are we responding?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it goes all over. The previous congregation that I served was, as an associate, was a large church in Des Moines by the airport. And we had a guy who attended regularly, who had lived on the streets for 20+ years.
Mm.
And it looked, I mean, he was older and it looked like he had been on the streets. He was a neat guy. I taught 8th grade confirmation, the life of Jesus. So I invited him to be a teacher. And I changed the curriculum and dealt with Jesus and the poor. So I invited him to share what it was like being on the streets. And I did that for 2, 3, 4 years in a row. And I asked him that first time, we are confronted by people all the time on the streets for money. What's your advice for us? And he said, this is his words. He said, don't give them a thing. They're going to use it for the same reason I did. Booze and women. Don't do it. And then he stopped and he thought for a second. And he said, but everyone has a story. And if you can sit down and listen to their story, that's what they need.
Ah,
And I had to backtrack a little and say, 8th graders, you can't do that unless your parent is there. I don't want an 8th grader sitting down with somebody on the street and talking. They need to be safe in doing that. But I also told him I could have given you $1 million for that answer. Because that's what this is saying. Everybody has a story. And are we open to listen to the stories?
So last winter, when we were having guest speakers, and someone was talking about homelessness,
Mhm.
in the section on that. They kind of, one of the presenters offered us a challenge, which is, some churches do a community meal.
Mhm.
Would we be willing to be in that rotation?
It was silent. We did, at the church I served.
A church I attended in Connecticut, we had an affair that was not in the church, but it was a church affair. And it was, I don't remember now why, but I dressed up like a bag lady. And I went and no one would sit beside me. The little children were afraid of me,
Mhm.
which says something about their upbringing and,
Mhm.
and then they figured out who I was. finally, they said, what's wrong with Mrs. Nichols? So, but it spoke volumes about, and I don't think it was exceptional in that church.
No,
I think there is. Yeah.
You have to find, you have to find a way to be comfortable around people that aren't like you, and whenever the situation is, and we haven't done it now because of COVID, but, you know, we do the friendship dinner 4 times a year. When that will start up again at the Methodist Church, and some of those people that come, you know, it's a wide range, it's basically people that need a meal, and when our church does it, you know, there are certain people there that we've connected with and we talk with, and, you know, we don't always eat with them because we're generally serving more done, but it's a place where I think, you know, I don't know, like call it outreach, but we just make a place for people and we let them sit there and drink coffee as long as they want, and, you know, and go out and ask them how they're doing and talk to them, and you have to create that sort of, it just doesn't happen by accident, you know, and I've gotten more comfortable with it as time's gone on, and some of the people in our group that serve good, they're real easy with them, those guys, and women seem to be easier than the guys, but it's one of those deals where you just, it's when it's way out of your comfort zone, it's kind of hard to always know what to say or what to do, but if you just sit down and start talking to people, you know, generally stuff will come, you know?
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
Yeah.
Not natural.
So the friendship meals haven't started back up.
You know.
So I have a point, something, that makes me feel uncomfortable is when I come from the church, is needles are burnt tinfoil. Right. It's just.
I think, you know, what I heard and what I admit myself is this discomfort with people who are behaving abnormally, or we think they will, that we don't know how to deal with somebody who may have this underlying anger. You can kind of sense their, you know, they may erupt. So how are you gonna deal with that? For people who just don't conform to what we expect, you know, and it's like, I don't know where this would go. I don't know if I can handle it. I don't know if I can trigger something.
yeah, I think there's a lot of that uncertainty that we live with. Was saying just, I guess, kind of get involved with people and it'll come, you say. That's your words. I don't know.
Is that when that happens at church that you feel that most intensely?
Not necessarily
Not
church,
necessarily,
just,
okay.
you know, just in general, you know, mentally healthy people.
Yeah, but you dealt with angry employees, you know,
Oh,
hard,
yeah.
difficult people, we used to call them, right?
You know,
So I mean, I think the context of a worship center almost exacerbates the sort of difference, whereas if you met somebody in another setting, you would probably know what to do. I mean, you would do what you needed to do, I would think, but here with everybody looking and what might happen, you feel like you're in some sort of a fishbowl and it's gonna disrupt everything and mess up our little
it's
fighting thing.
interesting that you raised that, because in the workplace, I really felt comfortable with my role as the manager, the person making decisions. I felt comfortable with that. What I also discerned is that there are things happening in the workplace that managers don't always know about. Bullying and mean girl kind of things, and that kind of stuff going on that you're not always aware of it. And I think about these workplace shooters and what was going on in that workplace that really triggered their violence. I bet you a lot of employers had to do some hard thinking about what their workplace programs are.
See, part of the issues there, though, is that and I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what I read here even in the workplace, so many of the mass shooters have experienced violence in their life for a long period of time prior to that act. So our authors here are saying we need to intercept the issues long before that mass shooting occurs, long before they get fired from a job and get angry and come back and shoot. We have to deal with that before. And as a church, I'm wondering, if we look at children, one of the things that impacted my life, and I think I've heard from a few others, is I had adults in the church that took an interest in me. And I've seen that in smaller congregations that I have served, where sometimes kids in smaller congregations don't have youth programs, but they do have adults who are really interested in them. And maybe even unrelated people go to their games and their events. I don't know if that happens here. I don't know. Are we interested in our
I'd like
kids?
to add, Sherry, we have in the past, had participation with the schools.
Right.
People would go in and help tutor. And COVID pretty much cut all of that out. Have we restarted that? Are we able to restart that?
Right, yeah.
How many people now are,
Well,
other than baking cookies?
I know it. I think I'm around 8 people right now who are willing to go in and tutor in the schools. You know, at one point we had 40. When we first started this program, we had 40 people tutoring in the schools, and which was quite.
Yeah, I'm sure those
But 8,
individuals
I'm
go and make
thrilled.
a difference.
They make a huge difference, just really true a huge difference. That's a great, amazing the impact.
Jerry's been telling stories about Dick Roper and the impact he had on
Oh my God,
kids in class.
Dick Roper was just the most incredible man, and the teacher that he worked with, talked about, how these children, I mean, they spent 20 minutes with him in the hallway working on math. And they would come in and they would say, I am really smart. Mr. Roper told me I can do that. And she said, I don't know what he's doing out in the hallway. I don't really care. She said, because these kids come in and they're just so bright and excited. And then these other kids are saying, well, I'm smart too. I want to go out with Mr. Roper. She said she was always had that issue too, but just amazing what once a week, 20 minutes with somebody, the impact that has on their lives. And I would, tutor, and I'd see these kids in the grocery store and they'd run up and say, teacher, I'm so cute. Teacher, I want you to meet my mom, and mom, this is, blah, blah, blah. But, it doesn't take a ton to have an impact on a kid. It's just believing in them. A part of it is believing in them and that they, I know you can do this. We've had amazing tutors in this church that have made huge impacts on children's lives. So, there's ways of touching kids and,
We don't have much time left, but this jumped out at me in chapter 3 on page 41. Veterans represent less than 8% of the US population, but 27% of mass shooters spent time in the military. May not have successfully completed the military, may have been dishonorably discharged, but that figure was striking to me. That's 1 in 4.
And I can't remember, I remember the statistic. Did they say anything else about it other than the fact that that's the figure? I can't remember them saying
Some
anything else.
of them, several experienced traumatic events while on active duty. So this is on page 40.
People come out of the military being changed by having been there, and it's not always a positive change.
Well, we just all know how long the VA system takes to get anything done. I mean, it's for people to get enrolled in the VA system and then actually get care mental health wise. We talk about waits within commercial insurance and Medicare. Compared to that, it's just even worse. And a lot of them, you know, out here, I mean, they have the VA clinic locally that only handles a certain amount of things. Otherwise, they have to go to Tacoma for stuff. I mean, it's just not, we don't do a good job of taking care of our veterans at all.
Well, maybe it ought to happen before they go and experience things. That's the thing I think of when I think about how interacting with kids and what a difference it makes. Maybe when you go into the military, you need to have some mental health counseling before you have to kill somebody. Well, but maybe to be educated about it and what could happen and how to handle it and where to go to get help. If something comes up, make yourself aware of it. I think too often we wait too long, and if we could, you know, teach people beforehand what could happen. And I don't want to scare people or children, but sometimes maybe we need to do a little more pre-work. Wait until it's hard.
I have a question on that, though. Is the assumption that the military itself is creating any problem or exacerbating the problem? Or is it corollary to the type of person who grew up in chaos and finds the military appealing because of its organizational structure?
Probably all of them.
Well, and then opportunity, which is another critical factor here in mass shootings, opportunity with weapons, familiarity with weapons, using weapons. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to take a safety off a gun. I have no clue.
Is it being in the military or is it being in warfare? That's so damaging.
Some of this warfare, like the example, people are exposed to stuff in Iraq.
Right, yeah. Some of it is combat related.
Right.
Others of it isn't, just that they were in the military.
My dad was in World War II. And when he came back, he was definitely not the same. My dad would never go out and be a mass shooter, but I do know that it affected him because I went in one day, or no, one night to call him for dinner. And he was there in the bedroom with a gun that he was gonna kill himself. So I think it was just the war, because I remember my uncles asking, did you kill people? And my dad could not even talk about it.
Yeah.
And those coming back from Vietnam was even worse.
Yeah.
And that's where we started to hear about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah. We're just about done. I would encourage you to continue to look at that last number 9, on this page, or on the paper, on the trauma. And ask yourself, is there any one of those kinds of things here? Did you have a good neighbor? Ask yourself, is there anything here that God is calling me to do? Is there anything with anyone? Because I think if we expand to others in some way or another, maybe this book has accomplished something. Let's pray. Gracious God, we do live in a conflicted world, conflicted nation, and we live we live in a society where there are so many who have gone through such trauma in their lives. Help us to be open to others, and we don't know how to deal with things, but help us to learn to love and to listen. We pray in your name. Next week, guess what? You get the one who wanted to teach this thing. So Matt will be back and he will be leading the course next week.
And are we doing 4 and 5?
No, I have no idea. I don't think he's gonna go because this class doesn't go long enough to cover all these chapters. So I don't think he's going per chapter. I don't know what he's gonna do. I don't really know. I will not be, I preach at Clallam Bay next week, so I will not be here, but it's not because he's teaching it.
I really enjoy this book. I enjoy the information, the way it's packaged, the way they write. I just, yeah, this book is forever.
Thanks for doing this, Dan.
No,